Back in the springtime, I attended some of the Festival of Homiletics, a week-long celebration of preaching and presentation by progressive, liberatory Christian preachers and scholars. So we are getting biblical this morning. One of the preachers mentioned Lot's wife and shared that she is the most referenced woman from the scriptures in poetry, I think it was. So Lot's wife has been sitting with me for 6 months, patiently waiting for her turn to teach us. Of course, it is Lot's wife who is unnamed in the scriptures, but who the Midrash, the wisdom of rabbis that supplements the Torah, has named as Edith. She is the one who breaks God's instruction not to look back as she is fleeing from her home, which is being spectacularly destroyed, fleeing with her husband and the children who would leave. And for this, she instantly becomes a pillar of salt. That story begins with God expressing that there has been such an outcry from people that they cannot ignore it, that the twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah have fallen into sinfulness, with the gravest sin perhaps being breaking the commandment to welcome the stranger, to love our neighbors, to be hospitable. To assess the situation there, God sends 2 emissaries to the city, 2 of the same who had just visited Abraham and Sarah. Abraham, just informed that he would be the father of nations despite being ancient, is told by God that Sodom is sinful, and so they are preparing to make their way to Sodom, where one of Abraham's nephews, Lot, lives. Abraham pleads with God, what if there are 50 good people? What if they fall short of that? What if there are 45? Maybe only 40? What if there are only 30 good people? 20? Would you destroy the city if there are only 20? What if there are only 10? God says he will not destroy the city if 10 are good. They arrive, and Lot, who has been sitting at the gate, welcomes them into his home. Initially, the angels decline, but Lot urges them to stay with him. They eat well, and as night falls, the home is surrounded by the men of the town, demanding the 2 be sent out. Lot begs them to behave and offers his daughters instead, and the crowd gets angrier. They only stop banging at the door when the angels strike them blind and they can no longer find it. This story is often misconstrued as one condemning homosexuality, but it is not about that at all. It is about the inhospitality of the residents who have wealth and food in abundance, and somehow this has made them cruel instead of generous. It has become the practice for the men of the city to violently harm their visitors. And so God decides that the city must be destroyed. Lot and his family are given little time to collect their things and make their way out before God unleashes his destruction. Sulfur and fire, which leads to explosions and more. God warns them not to look back, or there will be consequences. But Lot's wife cannot help herself, it seems. So this raises a few questions. I've been spending some time sitting with Krista Tippett in my mind also, and her philosophy of asking good questions. So we begin with, What other reason could there be that she would look back knowing it would be her end? It is natural for us to look back as we leave. We remember in those moments what was, what has been, the promises we once felt held by. We think about the community that we had or dreamed of having, our roots, the places we loved, and for Lot's wife, that perhaps her children also loved. It is deeply human to recognize that places become homes, that our relationships with places and people are what shape and make our lives. Maybe she was looking back to see if her daughters, who had chosen to stay with their husbands, had instead changed their minds. How do you not look back and remember your hopes, the people who loved you into yourself, the memories of firsts and lasts and everything in between? As I left Pennsylvania to take my position in Tarpon Springs, I looked back as we drove across the Susquehanna River for the last time, wanting to have my last memory of the place be not one of pain, but of beauty. Perhaps Lot's wife was looking back to help her accept that the city was worthy of such destruction. Given how natural of an instinct turning back would be, it seems cruel to believe that God would want to punish anyone already facing such a terrible situation. Is the second question, why would God make this instruction? In general, the God of the Hebrew Bible isn't the warmer and fuzzier God that we get to know once Jesus enters the picture. But God is also not unreasonable or punishing for the sake of being punishing. And so what would inspire them to make this instruction? Given the context of the rest of the scriptures, my interpretation is because sometimes we humans have a tendency to hold on too tightly to the past, even at the expense of our present and future. We continue to act in the ways that we have acted, even when doing so keeps us locked in cycles of creating harm for ourselves. God's attempt at going scorched earth in these cities of licentiousness is to try to create a blank slate, to give the people a chance to begin again, to build something new and, one would expect or at least hope, better. In order to do that, not only does Lot's family, the ones who are to survive, need to be far away, they need to be moving in the direction of forward in their hearts and minds as well as their bodies. Turning back slows us down and risks us getting stuck, whether physically or emotionally, as if looking back might cause us to freeze. As if Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt was just an affirmation of her own unwillingness or unpreparedness to make space for the future or even the present. The third question, then, is why salt? Why is she turned into a pillar of salt? The Midrash says that Lot's wife went to other homes in Sodom asking for salt so that she could share that they had guests for the evening. This is not part of the scriptures, though, and the text itself does not offer any insight into the question. What we do know is that salt is a component of tears. Being turned into a pillar of salt may be a way to convey tears of loss. Salt is also highly soluble in water, that is, When wet, the salt will melt away, and land that is saturated with salt cannot grow anything. Perhaps being made a pillar of salt, which will not last as a monument to the past for long, will become a stain upon the earth, as a patch where nothing will grow, is what God was trying to warn against. That there can be no good or healthy growth, that if there can be no good or healthy growth, that there will be no growth at all. Without a future, the past will also be lost because there will be no one left to carry it. Or to quote from Paul Razor in a 2010 UU World article, nearly a century ago, the Reverend Lewis B. Fisher, the dean of the Universalist Seminary at St. Lawrence University, described, "Universalists are often asked to tell where they stand," he wrote. "The only true answer is that we do not stand at all. We move." Razor continues, "Yet there are times when the opposite is true, when the realities are so daunting that we freeze up, playing out Dean Fisher's aphorism in reverse. We do not move, we stand." Or, to reference another scriptural story, the one about Moses leading the people from Egypt, too often we focus on the 40 years wandering the desert, and with good reason. We understand that hardship. But in doing so, we overlook the effort it takes to leave Egypt at all. Some of the people protest, "The journey will be hard, and is being a slave really so bad when at least you know how the system works?" They clung to their horrendous conditions because they were familiar. The past can feel like a warm comforter on a cool day. But communities, including congregations that are not moving or resting actively, are dying. Resting from the lens of doing appropriate care, of catching our breath, of meditating to bring us calm or to help us dream, of taking the time to ask the hard questions. These are all active resting. Refusing to engage in these practices, like refusing to do the work to move forward, is an indication of dis-ease, of unwellness. We become like Lot's wife, frozen in time. The thing is that generosity, the theme that this congregation as well as my own has been reflecting on this month, it's not just about money, or your time, talent, and treasure, as we so often say. It's about all of that and more, about the ways that we are open to curiosity, hospitality, care. The ways we think about not just this moment, but about this moment in the context of what has been and what yet will be, yet be possible based on who we are today. Generosity is temporal this way. It extends from before all the way to beyond. It's also a conversation that we have, both with the past and the future, to give direction to the present. It's a conversation with what we have about what is possible now. Perhaps we are like the children in their homes, or we are like the children as they create this new town out of crates and cactus, pebbles and glass. The present offers different possibilities to us, just as the future does if we let it. Generosity is about reaching beyond ourselves and into the future, doing just a little bit more than is necessary to make other things possible. We need to be generous in holding space, like the land of Roxaboxen, for dreaming, for others' dreams that we alone cannot imagine but will save us nonetheless. We need to look forward as much as we are looking back. Are we willing to reach forward for the generosity that the future is trying to extend to us? How do we hold space in this moment to honor the past, to name what it has given us, and to allow the future to yet be possible? A healthy past wants us to let go and grow forward. When Lot's wife looked back, she was holding herself back from being able to hold space for other possibilities in this moment. When I left Pennsylvania, I had already been making space in my heart and mind for the congregation that I am serving for a couple of months. My looking back was a last goodbye, an act of closure. While our minds sometimes imagine us living in the future, or our hearts and minds may try to convince us to live in the past, we know how it turned out already, and we can only ever live in this moment. Our own imaginations as we age may become less inspired, less curious, less interesting. Imagination is something that we have to practice, and congregations have to practice this together. And every time someone comes or goes, we have to rework the possibilities we had been imagining to make space for everyone. And we can, if we choose to do so. Choose to make a little more space. Choose to be a little more flexible. Choose to dream a little bigger. Choose to lean in a little more. Choose to be generous. May we choose to do the next right thing, the next caring thing, the next thing worth doing for the tomorrow we hope to build.